Namaste and good evening, everyone. Today we have a very special evening, Evenings with Sraddhalu part 200 on the 20th of April, more than that. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste. Happy to be with all of you.
So we will be continuing today part 5 on dreams, visions, out-of-body experiences. And we will be taking some pending questions and comments that we received from our viewers. You may post your questions during our conversation in the chat box directly on YouTube, or you may send beforehand some questions at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. So I will take one interesting letter we received from Vaijanti, if I pronounce correctly. In the last episode, you happened to narrate an incident regarding Saint Janeshvar of the 13th century. There you mentioned of a particular event that took place 2 to 3 decades after the Samadhi of Saint Sri Janeshvar. I am from Maharashtra. According to available established literature of saints of Varkari Sampradaya, the event you talked about took place after more than 2.5 centuries after the Samadhi of Sri Janeshvar Mauli, and it was Saint Eknath from Patishtahan of 16th century who entered into the underground Samadhi place of Sri Janesh Vauli located at Alandi.
Yes, I'm sorry about the lapse on my part because these are stories I've heard in childhood, and with age, somehow some of these memories have become somewhat fragmented. And to be on the safe side, I said a few decades, but actually it's a few centuries later that this incident took place, which is fascinating because we understand how even the physical biology of the body can be sustained by the link when the inner consciousness is held in these deep states of immersion in the spiritual consciousness. The link is enough to continue to hold the body consciousness without it degenerating in any way. So I'm sorry for the lapse on the dates, but yes, 2.5 centuries almost later that we find this event taking place. And the person who received the message in the dream was also a great saint, Eknath. So thank you for the correction, Vaijayanti. We can continue to the next question. What I would like is the questions we took up last time before we actually read from Sri Aurobindo. I want to review those questions now after the reading that we had with Sri Aurobindo. You will all appreciate that the text from Sri Aurobindo that we went through in some detail on Samadhi was in fact very deep, very large, very comprehensive, and sometimes too comprehensive to take in one go. So I would even recommend for those of you who really want to go deep into this and even turn it into a form of practice to review that discussion, reread the text from Sri Aurobindo, meditate on each of these words, and then let it sink into you. You will remember last time the questions which had been asked, and I will now take them up again in the light of what we discussed. Blue Lotus Mom had asked, why does humanity have these out-of-body experiences, abilities? Is there a special purpose? So to that, now we understand, because not only we live on multiple levels, but we are intended to be able to be conscious on all these levels. And Sri Aurobindo followed the more traditional framework of describing 4 distinct gradations of consciousness domains of experience. What is called the waking, what is called the dreaming, what is called the sleeping, and what is called the beyond. But as we saw, it has nothing to do with sleep. But to be able to be conscious on those domains and to be able to function from there and at the same time on these 4 levels even is or will be a more complete, let's say, realization, as well as one of the objectives of the integral yoga. So we can go to the next question, which was from Frederick.
Frederick is writing, could you explain to us how out-of-body travel can help us in the integral yoga?
So we understand now that the state of samadhi can be extremely useful, because in that state one can access certain experiences, certain domains, and on the return from such a state, one would carry the experience and infuse into the body consciousness, the surface consciousness, and so-called waking consciousness. Having had it in those states, infusing here and realizing and establishing here becomes enormously easier. You could do the same thing without having had it in a state of samadhi, and you would still get a result. But it is much more easy when you actually know what it is like, and then you infuse it. From its liberated state, you experience what is infinity, and then infuse it into the body. You experience eternity, and of course there are many degrees of experience, both of infinity and eternity. But then you infuse what is already a living experience on a different level. And so the process of the body consciousness awakening, the surface consciousness widening, the consciousness itself transforming, etc., becomes enormously accelerated. As Sri Aurobindo points out, a lot can be done without such a trance state. Out-of-body experience would be one particular domain of experience in the trance state. Again, you could do a lot without needing an out-of-body experience. But certain kinds of experience, again, would be much more easily had in an out-of-body state, and thereby brought into their completeness into the surface consciousness. So I think we have now a better understanding of the utility of the out-of-body travel. Certainly for those who have not had anything as an experience of a higher or deeper or wider state of consciousness, if you find yourself out of the body, well, obviously you are in a much wider, more free state of consciousness. But that's not enough. When you first come out of the body, you may be on one of the lower ranges. To then choose to consciously move into higher ranges and freer and wider spaces of consciousness would make it worthwhile. Otherwise, as we saw from somebody who had made an observation, if you come out and are in one of the lower ranges, it's not particularly nice, and it might not be helpful either. At the very least, you would know, yes, I do exist outside the body, and I'm not really a product of the body and the brain. You can go to the next question.
Tasman. In Letters on Yoga, I found that Sri Aurobindo says that he doesn't advise astral travel because of the dangers we could face. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Now, again, in the context of what we have read, and there will be more that we will read. Unfortunately, today we will probably spend more time on the questions, but where we will see some of this text also. Yes, he does say that. He does say that to somebody in particular. Now, you must understand, it is not something which can be said to everybody equally. And again, within the domain of out-of-body experiences, there can be a lot of variations. So let's put it generally in this way. If you do not find yourself easily going out of the body and having certain ranges of experiences, and you find yourself stuck in the body, having an out-of-body experience would be enormously helpful as a first step. If you do find yourself out of the body, but bound in the lower realms, that would be unhealthy and perhaps dangerous. But if you have grown sufficiently in consciousness and can consciously, let's say, shift to higher and freer realms of experience, and you can enjoy that without choosing to get stuck in the intermediate worlds, interactions with lesser beings, and going into the lower domains, that would be helpful and not too dangerous. But if your curiosity and temperament is to actually go and engage with the lower beings and start building relationships with them and dependencies, that would be extremely dangerous. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities depending on a person. There were individuals, in fact, in the ashram to whom the mother taught to go out of the body. There were others to whom she said she would teach, but they had to fulfill certain conditions. The first of which she said was to be completely free of fear. And we will be discussing this in the further discussion, probably next time, not today. So we understand, yes, there are dangers. We will elaborate on those more when we come to that discussion. But if you are conscious, if you are centered, and especially if your central spiritual aspiration from the soul, from the psychic being, is strongly set in the front, if it is largely the focal point or the center of your overall turn of nature and temperament and interests, then you can have those experiences and be guided to avoid the dangers spontaneously by the psychic field. Or if you are able to orient yourself consciously in aspiration with your priority to the mother's help and protection, then even as you enter these experiences, you invoke her help and protection, you will find it active and guiding you through whatever dangers may exist. But having said that, if there are dangers to out-of-body experiences, there are dangers to any experiences. If you go mountain climbing, there are going to be dangers, isn't it, for example? If you're traveling, plane, car, whatever it is, well, there are dangers. So if you fear, or if the fear comes from a deeper guidance, then you may avoid it. But if you find yourself so tuned, so turned that you do not have the fear, you have an active aspiration and even an interest, I would suggest explore the possibility of this development. If it happens naturally, and if you find yourself carried and you feel the inner sanction carrying you, then trust also that you will be helped through the dangers, which we will be discussing later. Once you understand them, you know what to avoid, and one can reasonably safely go through these experiences. We can go to the next question.
Ajrini, she's writing two questions. First, are dreams really required? Do they change the person or his consciousness as any spiritual experience?
And so now we can answer
then
this.
We'll come to the next.
So we can answer this now with a deeper understanding. Not all dreams are superficial brain-formed dreams. There are things which take place on higher planes. And yes, they will change a person, they will change the consciousness, they will change circumstances. So the lower grade dreams, which are largely reflections in the physical brain and its grade of consciousness, are not of much use. At best, they are reflections of things higher. But while those are happening, a different grade of your consciousness might be operating on other levels, as we discussed. And things may happen there which may have enormous consequences to your consciousness and even to circumstances around you and in your life. And the next question of Ashwini.
If yogis can direct their dreams, why can't they reach dreamless state, which is considered the higher state?
Yes. So now we understand the dreamless state is not a sleep where you go to sleep and you wake up and you don't remember dreams. Unfortunately, I've heard this stated by many of the New Age teachers in India, that when they read the text of the 4 gradations of consciousness, they will say, yes, you are waking, you are you're dreaming, and then you go into dreamless sleep, which is very deep sleep, and every time you have that, you have gone into some higher state of consciousness. No, not at all. For the bulk of the people, to have dreamless sleep is actually to have zero memory of the dream. That's all it means. So you go into deep slumber, you wake up, and you remember nothing. So you say, I had dreamless sleep. No, you didn't go into those higher supramental ranges of consciousness. You just do not have the continuity, or you went deep enough in the sleep that on return you had no continuity, etc. But what is truly called the dreamless state in the tradition, in the vocabulary in Sanskrit, corresponds to a domain of consciousness which for us is not formed, is not developed at all. So for most yogis, even to reach that state is difficult. And unless one is actively seeking to develop some of those ranges, it is unlikely that you have got to anything close to that even. So before even you can attempt to reach that, I would suggest develop the consciousness in the dream state, and especially build the continuity on return from dream. If possible, develop the capacity to be lucid in the dream state. Subsequent to that, you may choose to project your consciousness into certain realms or even certain spaces with the perception of the inner senses, or develop the out of body state of experience, which would also allow a great freedom of these experiences. And then that may allow and make easier for you to be able to access the still higher states. Even if you don't do any of this, if you enter these deep states in meditation, and it's important that we're speaking of really deep states, not just I closed my eyes, I felt good, came out. You actually go into a deep state where you do not have any awareness of the world. You lose all awareness of your physical body, or you find yourself fully conscious in your deeper inner subtle awareness. And there you experience these things without going into what would normally be called a state of sleep or other, but just the pure trance state, and have an experience and then build on that. All of these would be worthwhile and would be precursors to entering the full realm of the higher ranges. If once you're able to go, even in a meditative state, deep enough, high enough, you can begin to push the boundary each time, a little more and a little more. And you will see in the text that we discussed, Sri Aurobindo says, you can in this way push the boundary and go beyond the domain of mind, or go through the higher ranges of mind, as he names them, and all the way into the overmental and the supramental. Over time, doesn't matter. But the fact that you're steadily progressing, combined with the most important instruction Sri Aurobindo gave, to bring that consciousness all the way into the surface waking state and integrate it into life. If this you're able to do with the use of deep concentration or trance state, with or without trance, whatever you're able to reach and push the boundary, this would be your means before you can go to that which has been called the dreamless state, which is a supramental state. I also had one more observation last time that I pointed out. Sri Aurobindo uses fantasy with PH as well as fantasy with F. So, and I said there's a distinction. Then I was looking for a more precise use of the word. Looking online, I found a lot of the dictionary says fantasy with a PH is the old archaic spelling for the same word and it has the same meaning. But no, in psychology, I found there is a very clear distinction made. And the way it is understood is fantasy with an F is used to describe things that you create with your imagination actively. Whereas fantasy with a PH is experiences that you have in the Freudian vocabulary, they will say from subconscious states, but I would rather say from perceptions of things which are of subliminal, but reflected in you in a chaotic way. And that's the sense that Sri Aurobindo uses this word, fantasy, PH. We have a series of questions from the chat box last time, which we can now take up.
So, one comment, Nikhil, are Ashupati's journeys to different planes out-of-body experiences?
So it's an interesting thing. In Savitri, you will find practically the description of all experiences, spiritual, occult, and everything else, and of all the worlds, all the domains. Necessarily, therefore, there has to be a description of the out-of-body state, obviously. And yes, it is there. You will find in the initial phase of Ashwapati's yoga, he goes through certain experiences, has certain awakenings. Then he chooses now to go into the larger movement of his journey. So, I think it is the passage where it is the yoga of the soul's release. There, you will find before he is able to go into those domains, he puts the body in a state of trance. And the body is described as becoming, I don't remember unfortunately the exact line or the exact word. I will try to get it for next time. But the body is described as if being in a state which would be corresponding to cataleptic trance. And then he goes out. Why is this important? Because Certain worlds, when they are to be explored directly by an out-of-body state, need the physical body consciousness to go all the way to the cataleptic state. And I'll explain this a little bit. We'll have more occasion to describe this more perhaps later. If you have a partial projection of the mental consciousness or the vital consciousness, the body can be in a sleep state. So somebody comes, touches the body, it pulls you back, you wake up. Not much danger there. If you project entirely out in the vital body and you're wandering in the higher ranges, let's say, there again the body can be in a reasonably deep sleep, and somebody approaching the body will trigger the awakening process even before you can touch, because the body has its own intelligence which will pull you back. But if you project out to go into the lower ranges of the subtle physical, for example, where you are very close to the physical domains, then often it is a part of your subtle physical body consciousness which would also be out. There the physical body goes into a deep cataleptic state, in which the breathing and pulse rate can go very, very low. And at that point, if somebody were to touch it, the shock might be harmful and could cause danger to the silver cord which links you. It's even possible that the shock might cause even a problem of health. Or if on that level you wander into a dangerous zone and you're attacked in your subtle physical body, an injury on that subtle physical body would immediately reflect on the gross physical body, because it is the same subtle physical substance and subtle physical body. So most of the dangers come in that zone. There's one more danger. If you go out fully, removing layers and layers of bodies, so you go into very high states where there is complete loss of form. The mother describes having done this 12 times, and that's when she went to the borderline of the world of form and the formless, where she saw the prototype of the supramental body. But when you go to that degree, then intermediate bodies, so to say, are left also, and the consciousness almost entirely withdrawn from the gross physical. The link becomes very fine, and there again there can be a danger if there's a physical attack or harm on the body. Even somebody shaking it violently might produce distress, which would cause a shocking pullback, and the integration through all the layers might not be possible rapidly enough and would cause distress of various kinds. So generally speaking, these two being on the borderline, these two extremes being the dangerous conditions, any intermediate emergence in the vital mental bodies, and especially when it's just a basic separation, would not involve such a danger. But since in Ashwapati's journey he is going from the lowest to the highest ranges, and then going into those domains which are very difficult to reach as long as you are in the physical contact, as long as you're in contact with the physical consciousness, almost a complete withdrawal becomes necessary and the body goes into a cataleptic trance, and we have that description in Savitri. But before that, there are a whole range of experiences he has where he has not yet needed to do this. It's only when he decides to go now in a full exploration that the body goes into this state. So that's in answer to Nikhil's question. Sagar?
Sagar, is it possible in future evolution, when we are highly evolved and manipulate matter through mind, we can change form to another?
Yes. So all these questions were from the chat box last time, and they were part of as we were going through the text. So yes, the power of the mind to work on matter already exists. This is reflected superficially. It can be measured in electronics with what are called random number generators. By changing your state, shifting your concentration, the random number generators can tilt to provide more of this or that in the random split, zeros or ones, as would be the way we would measure. But that being already present, with a slight concentration, you can influence your body tissue, change its shape, change its characteristics, accelerate healing, etc. Pushing it a little further with infusion of vital force. Now, it's not the mind so much, but the mind guiding the vital energy. A densified vital energy can actually change or move material objects. Taking it now to a grade where the vital energy becomes almost of a density that is material, guided by mind, but it's not mind directly. At that point, you can not only move physical objects, but you can soften them, bend them, change their qualities. So the spoon bending takes place at that point. Or if one can grip completely on the material level, you can even change the substance and convert one grade of substance into another, or one element into another. Take iron, hold a coin, convert it to gold, and so on, which I've narrated many examples of these by people known to us, saints sometimes or otherwise, or people with occult powers. They do not represent a spiritual power. They represent more often than not a mastery through mind's will of vital energy of a densified grade close to the material. And it's on that level that the materialization, dematerialization, or transmutation can be done. In most cases, though, people who do it by occult means don't have this power, they don't have this capacity. They have rather an agreement with a being which has that capacity of that grade. So beings who live on that world very close to the physical are often some of the most mischievous, some of the most harmful also in some ways. They have an agreement, a pact with that being, and the being does it in return for something else which they get from the person. So as such, when you see people doing that, it may mean nothing. More likely it means they have got into a very dangerous kind of agreement which is harmful to their spiritual growth. But when a highly developed occultist or a person with a spiritual foundation is able to do that, and not as a routine, but occasionally when there is an extreme requirement, it can be by the force of the spiritual consciousness, but plunging all the way to that grade of density of vital physical consciousness. And so it can happen spontaneously in a moment of intense afflatus or a descent from above, which surges through and goes to that level and does it. You may not be able to repeat it on your own. Or it may be someone who's actually developed a capacity which is backed by spiritual basis, but now an occult capacity to intervene. But yes, all these would be possible, and we do know that there exist around the universe physical beings who have this ability, not just on earth, but even civilizations which have developed this ability. As I said, it need not be spiritual, but still it does represent a mastery. Next question.
Truth, a question at this point. If such a withdrawal through Brahma Ranra is the most important thing to do, should it not be the most sought after skill to learn by one and all?
So this was when we were reading Sri Aurobindo's text, where he's describing how a yogi may choose to go into a higher state, and then at that point withdraw the life energy and shut down the body, and then just remain in that state. So Vitruth's question is, if this is the most important thing to do. My first correction would be, no, it is not the most important thing to do. For certain traditions, it may be the goal. And particularly the more ascetic traditions, which look upon the world as a trap, as a domain of suffering which can never be changed, or as a domain of illusion. For them to get out of the trap, to get out of the illusion, to get out of the suffering, being the priority, they may draw upon such means. But if you're recognize that the world is a manifestation of the divine and our purpose here is to participate, to divinize, then withdrawal through Brahmarandra is certainly not the most important thing in any case, nor even something you would want to do. Why would you? When in fact you want to use any access to higher ranges to make it a means to infuse it into the lower and to transform and divinize. So it's only for a tradition which considers that to be the most important, then for them it becomes the most sought after skill. There are certain, in the Hinayana traditions of Buddhism, for example, they call Theravada now, this would be one of the goals. And so they do teach that. But how many can reach it? Out of several thousands of monks, one may be able to get to that point where it even begins to become possible. because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get to that point by cutting off links. And so, for all of you who are interested in the distinction between a more affirmative spirituality and a more ascetic spirituality, I would highly recommend for you to go back to these discussions we have already had in some detail from the evening series episode 82 onwards, where we have focused a lot on the practices of the integral yoga, and then particularly on the sunlit path, the direct method. These are the titles of the sessions, and one particularly which was on the difference between the ascetic approach and the affirmative approach. So all of these you will find covered in great detail in the sessions, I think number 82 onwards. Do go through these, because it's important for us to get free from this idea that withdrawal is a goal or liberation through Brahmarandra, etc. Yes, these things can be done. They're highly valued for that, for those who consider that the goal. Next question.
Turbanless. Can we attain samadhi in our sleep? Can samadhi be said to be uniting with oneself, with cosmic or universal consciousness? I had that experience in sleep. That was more real than this reality.
Yes. So samadhi, by definition, from what we have read now, at least in the way Sri Aurobindo has used the word, yogic samadhi as distinct from non-yogic samadhi. I'm not too sure what that would mean, but this would be probably the direction. Samadhi would be a state in which you are withdrawn sufficiently that the triggers of the world do not pull you out. Then you're in samadhi. But after what we have read, what we have studied, we realize now there are degrees in the samadhi. There are ranges in the samadhi, and then categories of ranges. Of the four, withdrawing from the first, all three become samadhi, so to say. Those would be categories. Within each there would be degrees and ranges, and so on. So, yes, you can attain samadhi in sleep. It may not be a yogic, consciously entered samadhi, but as remember, in sleep state there are gradations of consciousness. On all of these things are happening. So in your deeper ranges, something might be happening which you may recall as dream when you wake up. And it could be that in your inner being, because of work done in past lives, because of a certain development and maturity of certain parts of your consciousness, if you enter the sleep state with a certain aspiration and turn, you might find a part of yourself actually entering one of these deeper or higher ranges and remaining immersed in it, while other layers might still be active. But if you have gone in with a deep, quiet stillness and even a state of peace, those other layers won't be so active. This deeper layer would be the one in which you might be predominantly centered. And then on the return, you will have the impression that you were in such a state which was of a samadhi or a deeper or higher universal consciousness, etc. So again, I would make a distinction between the cosmic and universal. In the way Sri Aurobindo uses these two terms, he makes a distinction. On every plane of consciousness, you can have an opening to universality and an experience of universal consciousness. By cosmic consciousness, he means that experience in which all these universalities are held in a totality. And that he calls cosmic, because then it bridges all these ranges all the way to the most material. So the way these words are used in the loose, popular, modern vocabulary or in the New Age vocabulary is very mixed and very confusing. Do not believe just because someone says cosmic consciousness that they mean what Sri Aurobindo means by cosmic consciousness. They generally mean an opening to universality. So I'm coming now to turbanless and your experience. It could be that you opened to some universality of consciousness and you were in state of deep immersion with a higher or deeper sense of self and opening to some kind of universality there. Yes, that can happen, that does happen. But what it means, and this is important for us to understand, something within you is already familiar with that state. In which case, now you should be able to consciously enter that state in a state of concentration or meditation. If you recall the sense of what it felt like when you were in that state in sleep, and perhaps immediately on waking, or even now, if you still recall the vibe of it, close your eyes, withdraw consciously from the outer physical five senses, withdraw inward, turn to the memory of that and the vividness of the vibration of that memory, and let yourself be drawn into it, withdraw into it, or turn to it, and as if give yourself to it and immerse into it. These are various variations of how you would do this. So initially there's a movement where you withdraw and take it as far as you can with your personal effort. But then there's a point after which your effort cannot go, and then you open to that which is the influence and give yourself and let it then draw you into itself. This would be the general progression of such an exercise. And then you will find yourself being drawn quite deeply. Maybe not as deeply as you remembered from that, but at least close enough that it begins to become vivid. The first time, and the second time, and the third, fourth, fifth, 10th time, maybe you will come all the way to the full immersion that you recalled at least, or perhaps even exceed that and go into still deeper, etc. My point is, if you have had an experience once, whether in dream state, whether in meditation state, whether in waking state, any experience, you go into a space which is sacred, you've gone to the Samadhi or the Matri Mandir or any place which is at a mountain top, you open and you feel this deep peace and deep calm settling in you. That experience is already familiar to you in some part, and you should be able to access it now at will in a state of concentration or meditation, or in this case even as in sleep. Why not? But if you can get it in sleep, get it all the way to the surface. You should be able to now consciously reach it. And I would now generalize it to everybody. Any experience you have once had in concentration, in meditation, or spontaneously, if you have had it once, it is familiar, use this familiarity now to get back to it. It was given to you for this reason. And so take advantage of this as a gift and make the most of it. And yes, when you have that, you say, as Turbanless points out, that was more real than this reality. But that we can have again in the meditation state. When you go deep enough, that is so real. You come out, or even from that state, the physical consciousness, the surface world seems almost unreal. But you have to bridge it. You have to infuse that into this, and so on. There comes a point, if you have been able to bridge this sufficiently, that whatever you experienced in that deep concentration state, now with eyes open you are able to hold and perhaps even retain it in some basic movement while walking or otherwise. And then you should do one more thing. You had this within you as if. Now with eyes open, extend it around you. Because what is for you as a backdrop equally can become easily, with a little bit of turn of effort, the backdrop for everything that exists that you see, which seemed unreal to you or less real. And you begin to perceive this underlying more real reality behind this less real reality of surface appearances. Bring it to this point. It is extremely important. Work on this, and then you will find that which you had in a deep state, you can now continue to retain as a backdrop to all experiences of life from here. Once you've got to this with any experience, whatever that may be, however basic or deep it may be, once you've got to this, as you deepen in the inner, you will find you can deepen in the outer. And then if you go into deeper states of trance to get to something and then bring it all the way to the surface in this way, you'll find you can now extend it into the outer, and so on. So build this link, get it to this point where it can be the underlying perception with eyes open of your surface reality. That which is deeper within you now becomes deeper behind everything supporting. Then all the rest becomes very rapid in the yoga. And what I'm describing is general. It's not just limited to the integral yoga. This is the method Sri Aurobindo has recommended. But once you get the hang of this, you'll find in any method, in any yogic system, you'll find this is applicable. Even if the system itself does not aim for this. We can go to the next.
We have Another question from the nickname Running. As per the record of yoga, Sri Aurobindo worked to overcome tamasic nidra, sleep, achieving various levels of success over time. Could you elaborate on the methods Sri Aurobindo used to conquer often predominant nidra, sleep?
Yes. So, remember in the text itself, Sri Aurobindo tells you what he recommends as the method. And I will just quote from this. If you give me a moment, he says, concentration as the all-sufficient means. Concentration as the all-sufficient means for overcoming this tendency for the system to go to sleep. Let me, or maybe I'll come back to this later. We will summarize all the key things that we read last time, and particularly from the perspective of practice. But right now, just take this phrase, concentration as the all-sufficient means. And Sri Aurobindo generally recommends that while many things can be done with the aid of external means, techniques, methods, wherever possible, use what we have described as the direct method with the direct application of your concentration and your will to get to that result. If at all you find a certain technique helpful to begin with, the moment the technique begins to give you a certain result, realize that it is your state of concentration and alignment which is giving the result, and the technique was only a means to build this state of concentration and alignment. Now you hold the result by the direct means and let the indirect processes begin to fade out, become less and less. And you'll find very quickly you can now get to this, at best using initial support as a crutch, and then you can discard the external techniques completely and get to this. Why is this important? Because as long as you're dependent on some external technique and method, what you get to is limited by the technique itself. The moment you're freeing from the external technique and hold the experience directly, you can now expand and widen the scope of the experience to its full completeness. It's as if a kite is flying because of the aid of the string. Now, if you let a kite loose in a strong wind, it'll just spin around and fall. Chaos. That's our consciousness. The thread is what keeps the kite inclined and held tied to the ground, held in right relation to the wind, that you can now slowly release the thread and the kite keeps going higher and higher and higher. If the thread snaps, again it spirals out of control and falls. So I'm using this as an analogy where the thread is your technique, so to say. And you tugging on the thread is your willpower now gradually, slowly releasing the thread and allowing the kite to get to a certain experience. At that point though, you are stuck with the kite in a particular orientation to the wind, at a particular height, and totally dependent on the thread. Cut the thread and you lose the kite. Pull the thread and you can bring it back, down, up and down within this very narrow groove. But if now you're able to enter, you become the kite. You are no more the fellow pulling the kite. You become the kite and can now directly move its poise in relation to the wind. You begin to flap and you become the bird. You can fly against the wind, you can fly with the wind, you can go up and down. Having got to an experience, build your consciousness there, reach the experience directly, and then you'll have the full freedom of the widening of the experience. And this is the problem with very specialized and narrow paths. They rely so much on technique, they get to a certain poise and they're stuck with that poise, and then the experience also remains narrow. Occasionally somebody gets a wider experience and they become then the great leaders or teachers within that very narrow structured system. So we'll review this a little later when there is one more question which relates to the form of practice. But understand that any such means that you have used, to the extent it's helpful, use it. To the extent the help now becomes a limitation, drop the form of the help and take charge directly with the power of the concentration holding, and guiding. And again, I will recommend for you to review the talks which had to do with the direct method. There were two talks, I think talk number 91 and 92. 91 was imagination versus direct method, and 92 was on the direct method itself in elaboration. And then the talk number 93, which was on the sunlit paths versus the ascetic paths and the relationship between the two. So do look at these if you find it helpful. You can go to the next question. One more point. In the record of yoga, remember, Sri Aurobindo is describing, very frankly, he's describing the stages he's going through, the struggles he has. And you will see there, he had all the difficulties that you have, you and I have here today. Struggle with the sleep tendency when you are in deep state of concentration or trance or meditation. Yes, it's normal. Everyone has it. He also had it. But he overcame it. And what he tells you is you can overcome it. And when he says concentration is the all-sufficient means, take his hint, because it will give you far greater capacity if you use that as your primary means, and do not bind yourself to secondary means. Go to the next.
From the nickname Buzz, can these states, dream, samadhi, be induced? Does this need prior preparation or readiness?
Yes. So the simple answer is yes. A more complex answer will look at two aspects. Induced by whom? And then which states? So first take an example of Ramana Maharshi, where he entered into states of samadhi. Who induced it? No external agency. Even he did not surface part, did not consciously choose. But the inner being, which had already the familiarity, which came with that capacity developed, would go into state of samadhi. It would pull the outer consciousness into the state of samadhi and stay there. So it's almost as if he is born with that skill, but induced by whom? Not by you. You say, I don't know what you're talking about. What is the samadhi? I just go into very deep sleep, and so deep that you can beat up the body, as I mentioned last time, and he would still not wake up. But that would be a real deep state of samadhi. But it was pulled by the inner being, drawing you, holding you there, and then obviously it would have had some reflection on the surface, but not consciously built up. And maybe you would have felt in the young boy, oh, there's something very deep behind. He himself may not be superficially conscious. But then the external agency can induce it. And I will speak of two kinds of external agencies. One would be an environment. I'll share a personal experience here, which those of you who are so inclined might also find worthwhile exploring if you ever go into that space. So I had gone into Rishikesh. This is way back when it was not yet so convenient to go as it is now. And it was not yet so full of tourists as it is now. So I asked around, what is a good place? Frankly, I did not feel too much in the presence of the Ganga. Yes, of course, one has an association. There's a sacred presence. There were times when the presence was special, perhaps in the evening, during sunset. I felt that more strongly. But I have been used to much more dense and intense experiences here in the ashram at the samadhi or otherwise with my teacher. So it was nice, it was good, it was sacred, but that's about it. But I was looking for something more. And I was told, oh, there's this cave called Vashishta Gufa. Gufa is cave, Vashishta is the sage, the rishi Vashishta, who was also the teacher of Sri Rama and Lakshman. So there's a cave which is attributed to him. Very likely he was there. And I went to that place. In those days, there was a little ashram attached to the cave and a few monks on the banks of the Ganga. And you had to climb down from the road. And as I come down, maybe some 50 or 100 steps, as I turn, there was like a grove, maybe some mango trees. The cave was not yet visible, but it was just in front, and there was this little ashram. I felt a deep peace there. So deep that it felt as if some wild animal came there, it would become docile and peaceful. Now, this is the kind of description I have heard in childhood from our Puranic stories, that when such and such a king is going hunting, he sees a tiger playing with a deer and they become friends. So he says, there must be the hut of a rishi here, because the atmosphere that the rishi has built up makes this wild tiger become friends with the deer. It went in probably. Maybe I don't even know if I believed it, but it seemed right. Yeah, but would we ever see such a thing in our lifetime? Probably not. But coming there, suddenly that whole thing hit as the image of the presence. I said, wow, this is dense, this is real. And of course, that's the kind of density which I have experienced here in the ashram. So that is what I would be looking for. I go down and this is such a beautiful feeling, deep peace, dense peace, almost condensed materially. And the cave is open and we go in and go inside, and you could feel what it would be for a rishi to be seated there. You could feel the presence of the rishi. Must be Vashishta. I don't know. I cannot say if it is him or others, or it's not important. It was the presence. And it is so beautiful. You could sit there and just lose yourself in deep immersion. What kind doesn't matter, but you were pulled into it spontaneously. So after a while, of course, your body gets restless. You come out and you go to the Ganga. And you think, yes, probably this is where the Rama and Lakshman came to train under Vashishta. Very likely. It so happens now, I come back from there, and 2 months down in Pondicherry, in the ashram. Oh, by the way, at that point I said to myself, and on returning here, I said to people, the density of the presence that I felt there was only equaled by the density of the presence that I experienced in the meditation hall in the Sri Aurobindo ashram building. And in those days, it was more dense than what it is now. So that was the only comparison I could have, and it corresponded to nothing else I have experienced anywhere else. So I come back, 2 months have passed, and suddenly, at that time it was Madanlal Himmat Singh. He was one of the persons who was helping with the raising funds for Matri Mandir, and a man who had done a lot for the mother, and very interesting stories around him as a businessman. And he calls me and says, I have a visitor here I want you to meet. He has never done this before or after, and I don't know why he called me of all people. To this day, I do not know. So I go there, and he's got this monk in ochre robes, and he wants me to meet. Again, I don't know why, for some reason. And never again, never after. Never before, never after. So I sit with him and I ask, where are you from? And he says he's exactly from that ashram next to Vashishta Gufa. I said, wow, I had just been there. I said, what an extraordinary presence. It was so dense. And I said, have you been, he had been all over India, going to many sacred places. So I said, do you know of any other place where I will find this kind of density of the presence? And he thinks about it, shakes his head and says, the only other place I've experienced that density is in the meditation hall at the Sri Aurobindo ashram. Interesting. Isn't that fascinating? So the exact same correspondence that I had in my consciousness with the quality and density of vibes, I found him saying the same words. And as it turned out, unfortunately, when I went there next time I wanted to meet him, I was told he had passed on. There were others. I didn't feel the same degree of contact. And the last that I had been, they put grills because there were too many casual visitors coming, chatting, making noise, disturbing meditators. So they put a grill in front of the cave. And now there are visiting hours. You can't go before or after those hours, unfortunately. So this is unfortunately what happens with the tourists, and perhaps something similar which we are struggling with in the ashram here with the tourists around. Of course, it impacts the presence within also, and some dilution seems to be. So I've digressed, but I'm coming back to this point. You go into that space, and if the presence is strong enough, it induces within you a certain experience. Whether it goes all the way to samadhi or not, it is capable of taking you to that. Now comes the critical element, your capacity, your competence, your familiarity. Now it's possible that a person who has never gone deep in meditation, who has not even meditated, but has an innate familiarity with that state coming from some prior life. And in this life, unfortunately, the training has been to be all superficial. He goes into that space, and suddenly the intensity of the presence pulls him as if into that which is already known at a deeper level. But because the surface mind never gave it a chance, he never had a conscious experience of it, now he finds himself pulled going deep. And it would be the breakthrough that changes his life. Or he comes out and says, oh, that was so wonderful, forgets all about it and goes back to his superficial life. This is possible. Or somebody who is so pulled, goes into a state, comes out and has no memory of it. Or somebody who has nothing of the inner sensitivity or opening, goes there, yes, it feels nice, it feels so calming, so peaceful, I feel de-stressed from all my worries, I feel nice, now I can go back home and feel good. That's all that happens. So here comes your sensitivity, your readiness, your ability to receive and then to be able to experience and integrate with the surface, and all of that would be specific to you. So I said I will describe two types of such induction. One is this where an environment does it, and the second would be where a person does it. Example, Sri Aurobindo narrates this example of a person who wanted to have silence of mind. This was in the early days when Sri Aurobindo the ashram was not yet established. Sri Aurobindo asks him to sit down, and he goes on reading the newspaper, but he is already in that consciousness. He imposes it on this man. A deep silence settles into him. All thoughts stop. That's what he wanted. Suddenly he finds he's unable to think. Even when he tries to think, it's not moving. Now at this point, if he had some familiarity, some readiness, he would have said, wow, this is it, I've been waiting for it. What does he do? He suddenly jumps up, I'm going mad, and he runs away. And now you must understand, when Sri Aurobindo first did this to help sadhakas infuse experiences, etc., he faced all kinds of difficulties in, as he uses the phrase, reaching his help to people. He could do that to anybody in principle. More easy when somebody was close to him, much more easy when somebody was open and receptive. But then he found it had problems, it created difficulties in people. And there are two interesting aspects to this I'll come to. First is that he found sometimes when he could give them the experience, the reaction afterwards was to destabilize or provoke other kinds of reactions from parts within which were not ready and so on. Sometimes even rebellious parts, which got upset that there was an experience and would react against it to block further experiences. So this was one thing, and for which then he highlighted the importance of the psychic emergence, which would prevent such destabilizing tendencies. And the second point he says, which relates to this, is the ability to reach out his influence. He said he could do that, but to be able to reach it out widely and upon humanity, that came with the coming of the mother. Because the mother had in her consciousness held the whole of humanity. She became, as the Shakti of Sri Aurobindo, the link point through which he could hold the experience in its fullness and then infuse it through her into humanity. So also with her came also that particular insight of the focus on the psychic being as the focal point around which this kind of destabilizing tendencies could be avoided, and the oscillations and so on. So I'm sharing this as an example. They did this all the time. The mother did this all the time. Sri Aurobindo did this all the time. I have experienced with my own teacher the same thing, that he would simply imprint the experience into you. Depending on your readiness, depending on your receptivity, depending on your openness, depending on a degree of integration between the inner and surface layers, you would be either drawn in and be able to hold and or able to retain or not. But in his capacity, it was there. Now I'm coming to one fine point which is very important here. And this is something extremely interesting. And I'm going to share it with a slightly broader context. In the relation to out-of-body experience, because I had a lot of interactions with Mark over this time that we have known each other now nearly 2 years, and sharing, describing, questioning things. And one of the things I asked him, since you are so skilled now in being able to go out of the body and move across these worlds, have you ever been able to pull somebody and take them to whatever domains? Because we know the mother would do that. She would just take somebody out of the body when needed, or give them certain experiences. And we'll be speaking about this more next time. But so I asked him, have you been able to do this? He said he only tried with his wife once, his previous wife. And he described this, and I'm going to go pretty much as close as I can to what he described. He said she was in a semi-conscious state, dreaming probably, or half awake in the subtle body. He takes her in his arms and begins to pull her into the higher realms. And the first thing he observed was, as he's pulling her, she is beginning to go to sleep. So she's losing consciousness. And he kept telling her in the out-of-body state, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. She couldn't. So as he goes up, there's a point up to which she tends to go to sleep. There's a point after which she is now fully asleep. Then he continued to pull her beyond into still higher realms. And at that point, it's as if her form begins to slip out of his consciousness, his body. Or I don't remember now the exact words, fragment or slip out. And he couldn't take her anymore. It's as if there was nothing left to hold, and it was breaking down. And he could continue, but she could not. Now, I found this so fascinating. The reason I'm sharing this is because what he has described in an out-of-body state is exactly what happens when the same thing is done in an in-body state. So let's say somebody is being helped, is being drawn, pulled into a deeper or higher state of the kind that would be associated with a state of samadhi or whatever, or higher state of consciousness. As the person is being drawn, if they are not sufficiently ready, if they have not sufficiently developed the continuity of awareness to those gradations, let's say, as you're being drawn, they tend to fall asleep. Or they go into the state where they are no more registering what is happening. We would call it sleep. You continue to pull them, and then it's as if they have nothing left as substantial to be able to remain as they are pulled. And what remains is a very fine grade of their consciousness, which is so fine that it has no continuity in memory. So after that, when they come out from that, they will say, I think I went into very deep sleep. Or I feel like I have a vague memory as if I was in some very high state, but I cannot recall what it was like. But it was something very beautiful. At least I remember that it was beautiful, but I can't remember what it was like. There's no registration possible. Why is this important? Because you must have built up something of those gradations of consciousness in your daily life, in your waking state, in your sleep state, in your dream state, in your samadhi state, whatever it is. You must have built up something of it in order for someone to be able to induce it and give you an experience that you can then retain in a worthwhile way. I believe that even going out of the body, to be able to go into the higher ranges of even the vital worlds, you should have developed something of that gradation of experience or consciousness sufficiently integrated in your personality that you're able to go into those domains. Now, this either I have to confirm myself in my own experience or ask somebody who has had that experience. And we will be discussing this in more detail later. But my point is, you cannot go into a zone, into a domain, either in waking state or in meditation state or in out-of-body state, if there has not been some consciousness evolved of that grade sufficiently linked, at least to retain memory of that experience. So I've given a very broad answer. I hope it's not digressing too much from the question itself, which was, can these states be induced? Does it need prior preparation or readiness? Yes, they can be induced, and I've discussed several ways. And yes, prior preparation and readiness will make a huge difference. But the prior preparation or readiness could be from a prior life. in which case the induction may seem to be to somebody who has had zero prior conscious preparation and yet is able to hold something and recover, retain it. One more example I will give, which was from a Swami in the Ramakrishna order. And when I was criticizing the dangers of having drug-induced experiences, he wrote back to me and he said, look, I had this experience, he said, that as a young boy, I took some hallucinogenic, I think he was 18, 19. And in that he awoke to a grade of consciousness which was almost spiritual. And then he said, that's what broke from the physical body hard education and physical limited body consciousness. And he said, yes, there is such a thing as spiritual life. There's a reality to it. Of course, when he came back from it, he wanted then to pursue that, and he took up meditation, joined the Ramakrishna order, etc. But then I asked him, did you need that again? He said, no, I didn't feel it useful or necessary even after. But it helped to break the hard crust which the education and the Western upbringing had brought into him. So he said, it can be useful for this. My response to that was, yes, it can be, but then because you already had that grade of consciousness ready and waiting, that state basically broke the rigidity of the surface body identification, and then you awoke to that straight away. It doesn't mean it happens to everybody. To others, it may be that they go into the state that they are most used to or in their current evolutionary gradation, which may not always be healthy, happy, or if they are depressed at the time they take the drugs, they may end up in some of the hells, and which could be a very bad thing also, very dangerous even. So we had a little exchange around this. But I want to again share this point. If there has been a prior preparation in a previous life, even then, and something even which may be not so healthy, could trigger an induction just by blocking out the physical body consciousness for a moment, which allowed this deeper thing to come forward and open to some higher possibility. So I think that's a very comprehensive response to Buzz's question. We can go to the next question.
Verena, isn't it dangerous to suggest such deep withdrawal and meditation to a general public? Isn't it necessary to have a guide who knows you? Isn't it actually because of the dangers of such deep work that these kinds of teachings were traditionally secret? There are incidents, at least here in Europe, where people end up having psychotic states following meditation retreats and sometimes have difficulty coming out of it.
Mm-hmm. So I would give two responses to this. First, it's not being suggested to the general public, and even if it were, the general public first would not be interested, or if they were interested and attempted, they would not have the capacity of concentration to do anything useful, including dangerous or not. We are speaking already to a kind of an elite group, people who are interested, who have probably already practiced some things or are in a process of entering or deepening or widening of some experience. So, and with the background of all the things we've been discussing, I hope that danger would not exist for this group. Others for whom it might be dangerous will probably never come to this kind of a discussion. So we are okay. But the second part of the question is, or the second response that I will give is that the actual movement of withdrawal deep into meditation in itself is not dangerous or need not be dangerous. Especially if the withdrawal is in alignment or turned towards deepening in your aspiration or the source of your aspiration towards the psychic being, then all is well. It's even good that you do it. If that withdrawal is intended to get into some inner state through which now you want to access secondary, tertiary or other powers, worlds, beings, get into relation with them, that will be dangerous. But then you could get into those relations without doing this inward withdrawal by certain external rituals, magic, or deals that you make with these beings through formulae, which you'll find in all these occult books. That is far more accessible and far more dangerous. If you've once been able to go deep enough, and then you want to do that, you will tell yourself, oh, what a silly thing I'm doing. There is something much more valuable that I can already feel waiting for me. So I would rather say if you were able to go deep enough, you'd have felt something deeper still waiting for you. There is less chance that you would get distracted by other things. Unless there was a very strong tendency in your nature for some personal ambition or some very strong desire, or you are doing this in order to gain a power to be able to do something else, which again comes into the strong ambition, desire tendency. In such a case, you would probably do anything anyway what it is you're seeking and end up being dangerous to others and to yourself, irrespective of how you did it. In such a case, the spiritual effort would be dangerous because it's no more spiritual, it's no more aligning to your aspiration and your soul or the relation with the divine. It is aligning to other things which are your secondary goals. In that case, you would be largely going in the direction of people who seek to practice what they call magic with a CK, magic, MAGICK, to distinguish from stage magic, what they call real magic, where also obviously such processes would be known, taught in order to get to anything useful. Of course, you could stop with superficial ritual magic, which has zero value and it only binds you into more dangerous relations. Or you could go into these deeper ranges for aggrandizement of your ego, desire, willpower. Then you would get into danger in any case. So I would still say if your initial intention is for a deeper spiritual growth, your first priority being your own deeper soul, your psychic being, and second priority being the relationship with the divine as the focus, or any one of these, first or second, doesn't matter, then you are reasonably safe. And even if you have experiences of things in between, like some people have had experiences where while in that passage they see, hear, sense things, it doesn't interest because your focus is so clear. If at that point they say, oh, what is this? They may still go, feel and say, doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel right, and they would drop it. So at least in the way we are describing, in the context in which we are describing these, I would say there's nothing to fear. These kinds of teachings were traditionally secret. What is kept secret is not this, because this is quite obvious. You go in, there's nothing more to say about it. What was kept secret are the formulae by which you acquired the powers. That's why you had a grimoire or a secret book or a secret method. Sometimes they would hide certain parts of the formula so that even if you had the book without that missing part, you would not get the result. Because formula-based acquisition of powers is low-grade superficial occultism entering in relation to beings. It has nothing to do with what we are describing. So if you look at the traditional teaching, let's say of Buddhism, where you would have processes like this of going deep within, but for different goals, there was nothing to be kept secret about. If you go into basic practices of Raja Yoga, which are very similar, Buddhism having largely drawn from the Raja Yoga techniques, again, there's nothing secret. If you go into the methods of bhakti or karma, again, there's nothing to be secret there because there is really no risk or problem, as it is with the formula-based methods, which are necessarily dangerous and superficial occultism. But now I'm coming to the second part of the question, where Verena says that in Europe there are people who end up having psychotic states following meditation retreats and have difficulty coming out of that imbalance. To this again I will give two responses. It's possible that somebody was already unbalanced and then took up some practices with the ego, desire, ambition mode, which came from being unbalanced already. And then anything you do would lead to imbalances, especially when you get into a domain where you are disconnecting from the superficial physical consciousness. Then now you have no other references and your own ambition, ego, desire, aggrandizement becomes too large. And you've lost the link which held you down and limited your exaggerated tendencies. That's why you got more unbalanced. But you were already unbalanced. You got into a domain where it got amplified, but it was already there. Or the second possibility where this imbalance happens is when you go to a meditation retreat where the practices are unbalancing. Now, the problem with this term meditation retreat is that, well, there are so many systems, so many teachings, so many new age, I will say, innovations, because you have to keep creating something new, which becomes your USP, unique selling proposition, that you sell. I have this which no one else has, etc. If you say I have the same old boring technique which has been taught for 1,000 years and is already openly known, who's interested? I can read about it and practice on my own. At least that's how most people would respond. So if you want to sell a product, necessarily you bring all these fancy twists. And then what happens in the new age things is, to give people the illusion of having done something, they excite them. They expose them to excitations of various kinds, and they come back from that whatever practice saying, oh, it was so powerful, it was so intense, it was so amazing. And I have raised this issue sometimes when in the West, particularly, to warn them. When have you had somebody coming back from a meditation or whatever retreat saying, oh, it was so purifying, it was so elevating, so subtilizing and beautifying? No. At least if you had that, you don't go back. You go to that which is exciting, dramatic, etc. All of which are characteristics of the vital. So what they actually made them do was expose them to some kind of vital excitation in the name of meditation. Now, unfortunately, what that will do is precisely to destabilize your vital, destabilize your nervous system, etc., which is therefore, if someone has that tendency, would make it much worse. So there are two reasons I've said. One would be the person itself having this warping which gets exaggerated by deepening of consciousness, or the practices offered in the umbrella term of meditation are destabilizing. From all that I have read and seen and heard of new age such retreats, inevitably they are like this. The only exceptions are the more traditional and conservative types of lineages, such as in Buddhism or in the Self-Realization Fellowship of Paramahansa Yogananda, or others of these kinds, which are not at all attractive, not at all interesting for those who are seeking something dramatic. And they don't promise much. They'll say, well, you commit to this for years and then you might have useful results. They don't promise you that in one go you will have your chakras opened or Kundalini awakened, etc. Those who do that, it's always a vital excitation. I even came to know very recently something very dangerous. And this is a group that is based in the northern part of Chennai. I will not name it, but you can get the sense of it. They built a university with whatever name they had. And what I understood from somebody who initially had been strongly influenced by them and actually thought it was wonderful, what he discovered from inside the system was they were actually putting things in the food which were hallucinogenic. And so people used to have these destabilizing experiences, and they would tell them, see, this is your Kundalini awakened or your chakra opened or whatever else. And they would empower them or authorize them now to do the same to others, to open their chakras and so on. Which is quite totally wrong from a yoga point of view. That's not how chakras open or develop. So, unfortunately, a lot of this kind of thing does happen. So, one has to be very conscious of what you are opening yourself to. There's another kind of meditation retreat which I've also seen where they will associate it with awakening of Kundalini. And this is now becoming quite popular in certain groups in the West, because you're told that you'll awaken your Kundalini, and all the exercises involve strong vital energizations. So strong, violent, rapid breathing, movements of the body, again rapid, violent, intensifying, all of them intended to excite the life energy and the prana within you, and then directing them, channeling them through chakras on the spine, etc., in order to awaken the Kundalini. Certainly, they all get some high energetically. Most people don't have any useful awakening either of Kundalini or of chakras, but they get an energetic high. They're happy with it. And such practices again would be dangerous for someone whose nervous system and life force are not strong, stable, or balanced. And again, it would destabilize. But again, it has not to do with a real focus of opening to the inner and higher consciousness. None of the Kundalini teachers or systems focus on change of consciousness. They focus on awakening Kundalini and opening chakras, by which you might have change of consciousness. Start with change of consciousness, Kundalini or chakra being secondary, if at all. At least in the integral yoga, that's not your focus at all, and you have no danger at all. So in the method followed in the integral yoga, necessarily such a practice would not involve a danger, and those who seek the more exciting things would not come to these. So I hope that would put to rest Verina's concerns. I would like to see if something came up in the chat box regarding this. Okay, I think we'll take the last question from last time's chat box. You're silent, Alina.
From Luke.
No,
Thank you.
Tutun, from previous one.
Tutun. I have heard from many Sri Aurobindo's disciples saying that there is no practice. You only have to aspire.
Yes, unfortunately, that is the speech of the ignorant, and please do not believe it. If Sri Aurobindo, after all that he had written, said that there is no practice, you have only to aspire, all his writings could be reduced to one page, and that's all there would be to it. You would not have the synthesis of yoga or the Life Divine or any of the other major works, nor the innumerable letters which directly deal with practices, difficulties in practices, processes, methods, and so on. So I would highly recommend for anybody who has heard such a wrong statement to not believe in it. And again, I would highly recommend go through the discussions we have had from number 82 onwards, where we have developed not only forms of daily practice with which one can begin the practice of the integral yoga, but then we have gone deep into the sevenfold framework of the integral yoga and what is aimed at to be achieved by using specifically what we have described as the direct method, with which, as a single point broad approach of the method itself, one can reach to all of these results or utilize any secondary or tertiary practices, amplifying them using the direct method, and then discard the specific form of the practice the moment you are able to reach to certain beneficial outcomes. So it's very important not to fall into this error of understanding. The last question from Luke.
Luke, thank you for the very interesting series on dreams, visions, out-of-body experience, exteriorization. I would like to understand and to make sure if I understood properly the practical difference between the four processes mentioned in this series: dreams, visions, projection of consciousness, out-of-body experience, exteriorization.
Yes. So he has given his own understanding of it, which I have skipped here. I will add one more to this. We have also spoken of lucid dreams. So yes, dream at a physical level would represent this chaotic representation that takes place in the surface physical brain consciousness, which may often include elements from higher realms, associations, junk, and etc. That's what normally passes as dream. But we also recognize that there are higher grades of dreams, which could be memories of some wanderings of consciousness on other worlds, reflections of those wanderings, or even they could be symbolic representations of things occurring on higher gradations in our consciousness or worlds, and as reflections of those symbolic dreams, etc. So all that would come into the category just of the word dreams. Lucid dream would be when in that dream state you become conscious that you're dreaming, and then you can direct the dream itself. But by vision, we mean especially, again there are categories, but we mean especially the perception of realities which are outside the domain of the material senses. So necessarily a vision would take place with the subtle senses. What they are vision of, they could be visions of things which are far away on the physical world. They could be visions of things which are in the intermediate worlds. They could be visions of things which are represented symbolically of spiritual forces, tendencies, events, actual circumstances. So as broad as is the dream scope is the vision scope, except that you're perceiving through subtle senses. Then the next thing which we have spoken of is the projection of consciousness, where a part of your consciousness, as if, so to say, pokes out, feels, wanders, senses things, as if it's there, but you've not gone out of the body, really. And this can be done even in a state of deep concentration with you fully physically embodied, or partially withdrawn into some state of mild samadhi, but then a part of the consciousness projected, but you're still primarily here. From that, one could also have a complete separation of some layer of the subtle body, generally the vital, and again it could be on various gradations, or even there could be degrees, but sufficiently that you are in a complete body independent of the gross physical. And that would be the proper term that Sri Aurobindo uses, exteriorization, or what is the word out of body experience is as a description too loose. It could confuse with projection also. But we have to make this conscious distinction. We will use the word out of body experience for exteriorizations. So these are 5 different things that we have been covering, and it's important to be clear of these distinctions. I see that there are several questions in the chat box, and any of these, if as relevant, we will take up, will merge into the next discussion, where I want to go more deeply into texts of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, where they describe certain experiences as well as the processes and the requirements for having out-of-body or exteriorization experiences. So before we close, I want to recapitulate certain important things which we read from last time. And I want to highlight elements of that which are directly relevant for practice. And so go back to that text, review it, review the discussion we had from that text. The most important thing that stands out is to develop the power of concentration. Let this grow. The more you are able to exercise this, and which means direct all your awareness to one point focus of consciousness, state, awareness, experience, sensation, whatever it is, and then staying in it to the exclusion of all else. This would be the basic skill. That now you turn inward to a certain state, to a certain quality or grade of consciousness, and then deepen or shift higher, deeper, whatever form it takes. This power of concentration being the all-sufficient means also to prevent the mind from falling asleep will be your first key, to which you can add, once you have this, work on building the continuity from dream state to waking consciousness, recalling and extending the thread, bridging it, or parallelly, as you sit in concentration, as you go deep into meditation, using the power of concentration, take time on the return to build the continuity and infuse whatever you have held, experienced, received in the deeper or higher states into the surface parts, until you can actually get up with eyes open and move around without losing that deep immersion of the meditation. So it will be done in gradations. You'll first open your eyes and lose it. So you close again, regain, open, until you can open without losing. Then you'll find when you get up, you lose it. So again, you hold that poise, slowly move until you can retain and move around without losing it. And so on. In this way, you will extend. Work on this. Power of concentration first, followed by this building of continuity of consciousness. With this, you can not only draw what was within, but you can also slide right back. Now use this movement of sliding back to be able to go in. Withdraw from the surface consciousness and the surface senses, to the point where your physical body almost becomes like a thin, ephemeral, superficial awareness. Center yourself in this. Hold this. Having got to this point, next you will consciously put the seal, using Sri Aurobindo's vocabulary, put the seal on the gates of the outer awareness, so that you can remain in this without the thing outside pulling you out. If you can get to this now, you have full access to almost everything. Sri Aurobindo mentions, remember, there are sometimes physical methods used. I did not mention all of them. I said even physically you can block the ears and eyes, but there are also some of the physical methods are quite weird. Sometimes they use psychoactive drugs. You will have read of some of the In the Greek tradition, they speak of sulfur vapors coming for the Delphi, in Delphi, and then sometimes they use alcohol to numb the surface consciousness, extreme tiredness from various activities. All of these, you see, they are intended to dull the surface so that the inner can be not pulled out. So you'll see people who use such methods, their physical consciousness tends to fall into a stupor or inertia, so that they may stay in that interiorized state. All of these are harmful for a yoga which wants to bring that state all the way to the surface, not losing it, but transforming the surface in terms of the inner. So we're going to discard all those means also, put the seal on the gates of outer awareness also by means of concentration. By withdrawal of awareness and a will intended that nothing will bother you, nothing will disturb you. So the more complete the withdrawal, it's like threads being drawn back. You will see a text of the mother where she speaks of threads of consciousness being drawn back and rolled up before the plunge, and then nothing bothers you. You're aware if you need to, you can say, there's something happening, not important. Or you choose not to be registered unless it becomes very significant. You withdraw fully, you do not even know superficial things happening. And it's taken care of automatically by the deeper subliminal consciousness. You have nothing to fear there. So, with this withdrawal, putting the seals on the gates of outer awareness, preventing mind from falling asleep by method we discussed last time, turning your 5 senses to the inner. In practice, it will be 3 senses: vision, touch, and so to say, hearing. You listen to the deep peace, silence, feel the denseness of the peace, and as if perceive it as a wide or deep expanse or state. And with all your attention through the inner senses, so to say, turned to the experience, you can easily stay without being drawn out, without being affected, without being disturbed. Build to this point. From here on, which direction you take depends on you, but everything becomes possible for you. Which, among the things Sri Aurobindo mentions is, from there, as you perceive things through your subtle senses, you can also develop the subtle senses to almost train them to increase capacity without limit. You can shift to deeper inward or upward or higher states of consciousness. From that state again, you can project a part of your consciousness to perceive, sense things, or, which is a theme we will come to specially next time and the next 2 times, learn to be able to consciously separate in an out-of-body state. So, be clear that your goal should be to always grow in consciousness and not engage with intermediate domains or goals or powers. Growth of consciousness being clear, alignment to your deepest aspiration of the soul, your psychic being your base and your reference. At any point, if you feel something uncomfortable there, you follow that. It will lead you, it will guide you safely through without any danger. And where there is danger, it will indicate and guide you to avoid it. So this would be the base upon which all our further discussions would become relevant. We will also look at the method which is Mark has recommended as a method for going out of body or having the out of body experience, which does not require you to build any of this deeper focus or concentration. It is just being done by the process of going to sleep, waking up in between, and then with an intention going back to sleep with the method he has discussed, which we will also talk about. You can have the out of body experience. But to be able to master your consciousness, if you have worked upon this, you will have that mastery extended in that state also. So it's going to be a very, I hope, a fascinating and very practical discussion also in hopefully the next 2 sessions. Let's take a moment then to concentrate and center ourselves in our aspiration and the soul's sense of purpose and relation with the divine. We took birth for something very important. We're not here by chance. We're here to grow into our fullness in relation with the divine and with our own inner divinity. And then to realize that and to express that more and more completely in all our parts including the most surface so-called waking state, into the physical consciousness, including and in our lives. This is our goal. All else we do is towards the fulfillment of this.